We are here today to announce criminal charges against a nurse for failing to provide care to a patient of a senior living facility known as Cathedral Village in the Upper Roxborough neighborhood of Philadelphia. That patient was Herbert R. McMaster, Sr., and he died because of a criminal lack of care on April 13th at Cathedral Village. We are charging a licensed practical nurse who was responsible for Mr. McMaster's care, Kristen Gainey. She's being charged with felony neglect, involuntary manslaughter, and tampering with records. We are charging Gainey with failing to administer a series of neurological checks on Mr. McMaster after he fell in his room on April the 12th. Gainey could have saved Mr. McMaster's life had she simply done her job. Instead, she intentionally ignored her job responsibilities, falsified paperwork, and lied to her supervisors to cover up this inexcusable conduct. When a family selects a nursing care facility, they expect that community to provide a warm, comfortable, and safe place for their loved one to live and rehab. They don't expect their loved one to be found dead in the lobby of a place that was supposed to care for them. Let me be clear. My office will protect senior citizens in our Commonwealth using every single tool at our disposal. This nurse violated the trust that was placed in her by her patients and their families. She violated her legal duty of care that she had to provide for Mr. McMaster's well-being. We will hold her accountable for failing to perform her job and then lying about it. Let me walk you through the specific facts of this case. On April 9th, Herbert R. McMaster Sr. was admitted to Cathedral Village. Mr. McMaster, who was 84 years old, had recently experienced a stroke, and his family was hopeful that rehabilitative services offered by Cathedral Village would help him in his recovery. It's important to note that Mr. McMaster was a retired lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army, and we thank him for his service. Due to his stroke, Cathedral Village staff noted that he had a high risk for falling. On April 12th, just 3 days after his admission, at approximately 11:30 p.m., staff found Mr. McMaster on the floor of his room after he had suffered an unwitnessed fall. These types of accidents are not uncommon in senior living facilities. If this nurse had simply followed the written protocols that Cathedral Village had in place regarding patient falls, she could have saved Mr. McMaster's life. Tragically, Kristen Gainey did not follow these protocols. Immediately after the fall, staff noted a small cut and some blood on the side of Mr. McMaster's head. At the direction of Gainey, Mr. McMaster was placed in a wheelchair and wheeled out to the lobby area. Under Cathedral Village policy, neurological assessments are required for patients who experienced unwitnessed falls to identify any decline or change in a patient's condition so that appropriate medical treatment can be sought if necessary. The fall protocol requires the following: close observation over the course of 72 hours after the fall. Specifically, the first hour requires neurological assessments every 15 minutes. This was not done by Gainey. The next 3 hours required hourly neurological assessments. This was not done by Gainey either. The remaining 5th, 6th, and 7th hours, Mr. McMaster sat in the lobby without a single assessment until his death at 7 a.m. All told, Gainey failed to administer 8 neurological assessments required under Cathedral Village fall protocol. Neurological checks, it's important to note, only take a few minutes to conduct. They require a test of motor and verbal skills, a measure of eye response to light, and a check of vital signs. Gainey did not perform one. Not one of these checks on Mr. McMaster, despite completing paperwork saying that she did. Gainey failed to perform her duty to perform those checks on Mr. McMaster during the first, second, third, or any of those next critical hours. By the 7th hour, Mr. McMaster had died in plain sight in this lobby. Upon learning of Mr. McMaster's death, the Assistant Director of Nursing asked Gainey for the paperwork on neurological checks. When Gainey provided it, the nursing supervisor immediately noticed that the most recent check was done at 7:20 a.m., after the reported time of Mr. McMaster's death. Gainey admitted to falsifying the last check, and our investigation uncovered surveillance video footage from the facility showing that Gainey did not perform any of these checks as required on Mr. McMaster. Gainey falsified all of those neurological checks, not just the last one after McMaster's death. The chief medical examiner for the city of Philadelphia concluded that the cause of Mr. McMaster's death was blunt impact head trauma, with a contributing factor being the untreated subdural hematoma. The evidence clearly shows that Gainey intentionally, knowingly, and recklessly caused serious bodily injury to Mr. McMaster by failing to provide treatment of care. Our agents filed criminal charges and took Gainey into custody this morning at 9 a.m. without incident. The felony neglect charges carries a potential sentence of 10 to 20 years in jail upon conviction. The involuntary manslaughter and tampering with records charges are misdemeanors, each punishable by 2.5 to 5 years in jail. We will hold Gainey and anyone who knowingly neglects a care-dependent person here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania accountable for their crimes. The Office of Attorney General is focused on protecting each and every Pennsylvania senior from neglect, scam, and other threats. Our care-dependent neglect team, led by Laurie Malone, works zealously each and every day with local and state authorities to root out abuse and neglect of our seniors and care-dependent persons. In recent months, it's important for you to know that we have filed neglect and other criminal charges against a Luzerne County nurse, a Berks County man, and Erie County aide for failing to properly care for individuals entrusted in their care. My office will continue to prosecute those who neglect seniors and care-dependent people throughout the Commonwealth. But we are at a disadvantage in this fight because of a flaw under Pennsylvania law. We need reforms to the laws here in the Commonwealth to enable us to investigate more crimes against people living in nursing care facilities. Specifically, under Pennsylvania law, my office has authority to prosecute criminal neglect cases, but not abuse cases of victims living inside nursing homes. A good example of an abuse case is where a person is physically slapped or hit. An example, of course, of a neglect case is when an individual has a duty to provide care for a dependent person and fails to provide that care. I support expanding our authority under Pennsylvania law so we can prosecute both abuse and neglect cases. And I support House Bill 1124, sponsored by a representative named Jim Cox. House Bill 1124 would expand my office's authority. It would give the office jurisdiction to investigate and prosecute those who physically abuse seniors living in nursing homes. It would also expand our ability to prosecute neglect cases by removing the need to prove that actual physical injury occurred in order to establish the charges, meaning just the effect of the neglect would be enough to show there. This bill, I would note, has passed in the House and is currently pending in the state Senate. I want this authority, and I am renewing my call for the legislature and the governor to pass this legislation and give us that authority so we can better protect seniors and those who are care dependent here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. I want to thank Commissioner Rich Ross and the Homicide Division of the Philadelphia Police Department for their assistance in this case. It was invaluable, and they do a tremendous job day in and day out for the residents here in Philadelphia. Nothing can ever bring Herbert McMaster Sr. back, and his family will always continue to feel the weight of his loss. There may be some who wonder, and some of you who may want to ask, whether or not this case received more attention than usual because Mr. McMaster's son is a prominent individual, the former National Security Advisor to President Trump. While it is true that there is certainly more interest in the media in this case as opposed to some of the other cases that we've prosecuted, we handle these cases all the same. We do it regularly, we do it with professionalism, and we do it in a thorough manner. It is a core part of our mission, and I really want to thank Laurie Malone and her team for their tremendous work day in and day out on these difficult cases. But if the prominence of Mr. McMaster's son, HR McMaster, brings a spotlight to these kinds of cases and helps families to ask the right kinds of questions when they put their loved ones in these facilities, well, I think that's a good thing. And I know the McMaster family agrees with us on that fact. They want to ensure that something like this never happens to anyone else, that no other family should have to suffer the loss that they've suffered as a result of this type of criminal neglect. My office is serious about protecting care-dependent Pennsylvanians. We will not ever hesitate to enforce the law and prosecute neglect cases wherever we find them. We will hold Kristen Gainey accountable for not providing Herbert McMaster Sr. the care that he deserved, the care that would have saved his life.